Welcome back to Kevin Pollak's Chat Show. I am, as always, Chat Show. How the hell are you? You know who I'm talking to when I ask that question. Please write to us at kpcsfanmail@gmail.com. You may be wondering, hey, Kev, why are you coughing up the email and asking us to write to you when, in fact, you don't read the fucking emails? Well, first of all, I don't remember saying, if you write to us, I will read your email. So let's take your ego the fuck out of the composition and get back to my needs, which is I like to hear from you. We're coming up on 10 years old, so I'm going to make a couple requests. I read your emails is the point when I'm alone. For me to read them back to you seems a little needy and narcissistic on your part. Just let it go is all I would ask. Don't stop writing, but stop being so fucking needy. kpcsfanmail@gmail.com. The truth of the matter is I will bust myself. Sometimes I have time to prepare for these shows long enough that includes me fishing through these 6 million emails and picking which ones I will read back to you. And this was not one of those times. I just simply had enough time to do my prep on our guest. For those of you who give a good goddamn, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Season 2 has dropped. Available on your Amazon Prime. If you enjoyed 2-day shipping with your Amazon Prime, you've got a lot of free programming. And one of those is the, I'm just going to say it, multi-award winning Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Reigning champs, the Golden Globes, we picked up nominations again just a couple days ago. And man, I wish you all the feeling of that sort of relief. to somehow win a Golden Globe, your first attempt at doing a show, and then the hype and all the ridiculousness of will we get nominated again, just to get past that point. And on a less meaningful point, the pool is very overfilling with water. The rain in Los Angeles should stop already. I think the fires are out, is also what I'm suggesting. The New York and European premiere of the Mrs. Maisel last week was astonishing and amazing, and to have that sort of response in a live theater sort of environment for a television show is a very strange experience and magical at the same time, to hear a room full of strangers in the dark laughing exactly when you want them to and hanging on the sort of emotional nuances of the show in silence. Yeah, kind of great. Our guest today is a filmmaker, and I want to talk to him about those experiences also, of seeing something you've worked so hard on and for so long, and then an audience who doesn't know you will sit together in the dark and tell you, in fact, as a group who've never rehearsed before, as a group, whether what you've done is in fact what you think it is. My guest is wildly successful filmmaker, specializing, I'm going to say, mostly in comedy, where he is a member of the $1 Billion Club. Please welcome Pete Segal. Pete.
Hello.
How are you?
Okay, how are you?
I hope you're good proceeding without, I didn't mention it, without headphones. It just feels more like a conversation without
That's fine by me.
Okay, good. All right, so first things first, how is the holiday season treating you thus far?
Well, I literally just landed from working on another movie in Toronto in the frozen tundra, so I have not really experienced the holiday season.
It's already cold there.
Oh, it is freezing.
Yeah. North of Toronto, in the city itself?
In the city and north. We shot at an airport in a place called Markham, and apparently the elevation is only 50 feet different from Toronto, but it is a winter wonderland there, and it's not snowing in Toronto, but it should. It's the same temperature.
Right.
Just because of the lake effect, they don't actually get the snow.
And you're born and raised in?
New York.
That's correct. So you're already accustomed to...
I am, but I became a bit of a pussy, you know.
You've lived in Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, and I did some time in Phoenix.
Yeah, it doesn't... Oh, wow. It doesn't take long to lose the ability to step into that climate and not start complaining immediately.
No, but then they were nice to me, the production. They bought me like the most sophisticated coat, you know, one of those Canada Goose things.
Sure.
And a lot of the crew just looked at me like pissed.
Yeah.
Because I could literally, you know, toast marshmallows.
Inside.
You know, in my kidney warmers.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, I got a lot of shit for that, but I was quite warm.
Is there a thing called kidney warmers?
Believe it or not, yes. There are pockets for it. There's little things that you cinch up that the wind can't like rush up like your skirt, and because just wearing the parka isn't enough, you have to like zip it down and tie it up.
Made by the Canadian Goose people.
Yeah. And the funny thing is when I was in New York last year doing a movie, my son, who's going to the University of Michigan, would say, "Dad, you're a wuss. Michigan's way colder." This year I could say, "Son, you're a wuss. Toronto's way colder than Detroit."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's just a little north of Detroit,
bit.
yet...
And yet a lot colder. Yeah.
And you're right, the degree doesn't have to change much. There's a strange thing about the wind that cuts through everything.
Yeah. It's the lake.
It is that goddamn lake.
That goddamn lake.
Yeah.
And but I had not been back to Toronto since I filmed Tommy Boy there 24 years earlier. So it was strange. There was a lot of deja vu.
Yeah. It has changed
a lot.
So very much.
And where we shot Callahan Auto is this historic whiskey distillery that has remained, but it's like the movie Up. They just built these huge towering skyscraper condos all around it. So I couldn't even see it from the street. And then we were scouting. We actually shot a part of this movie I just finished there. And the crew kind of knew where they were taking me. They said, we're going to get a kick out of this. And finally I walked in and I said, I have major deja vu. I've been here.
Yeah.
And then I got at the right angle and I realized, holy shit, this is where we shot it. This is Callahan Auto.
Yeah.
So that was a moment.
Is a set of sound stages or an actual...
No, it is a set of... It was decaying warehouses filled with rats and rat shit, the rats the size of footballs. And
rat shit
now,
the size of baseballs.
Baseballs. But now it is this spectacular place with wine and cheese shops, and it was this winter wonderland of like a winter carnival, like you'd see in Europe.
Right.
It was fantastic. I mean, it's totally renovated.
And the sense of deja vu came from...
I stood where...
Because it sounds
Tommy,
so different.
Well, yeah. Well, right where we had built a platform where Tommy Callahan, said goodbye, to the troops at the end of the movie, and that's where I stood. And that was actually the last day of filming, and so I had a lot of emotions about that. But it was just it hit me only at a certain angle of looking at the buildings that I finally recognized where I was.
Right. I shot the only fiction film that Michael Moore has directed, Canadian Bacon.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I remember this is the 90s, of course. So many movies were being shot in and around Toronto. Mm-hmm. I've now shot 3 times in Winnipeg, 3 different films. Okay. That's another.
I have not been there.
Yeah, coldest place easily. Vancouver, a lot like my hometown of San Francisco. There are parts of Canada I think we've all worked in.
I've worked in Montreal and Quebec, not Vancouver, but Toronto feels the coldest of any place that I've been there. I mean, Vancouver is sort of mild. It's like
very mild in comparison.
Coast. Yeah.
We need to get you to Winnipeg if you think you felt cold.
Okay.
Yeah. My first shot...
More punishment.
was an exterior 3 a.m. in February.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, they had a van standing by with a heater blasting so that after every take, I would dive into the van and thaw out my eyes.
Yeah.
When your nose hairs get a little cold, you can feel them stiffening.
Yeah.
That's a weird feeling. But when the moisture in your eyes starts to harden...
Yeah. No, the worst is shooting out there at, we shot one day, it was snowing 16 degrees. And my DP, his nose was so constantly running, but we didn't have lunch breaks because the sun would go down at 4:30. We shot with a kid, so we had very tight hours. And his nose was dripping into his oatmeal. And I said, "You're going to eat your own snot. And if that happens, I will throw up. So please stop."
Yeah. And if he only had facial hair to block the drippage. Well, let's talk about second act. I worked with J-Lo on her, I believe, motion picture debut. No, it was the first time that an artist had the number one album and the number one film at the same time, Wedding Planner.
Okay.
And she was a complete and total delight and inspiring to be around in terms of her sort of mother hen and family sense about her. And in fact, her mom was around
Right.
on set. What is she like these days? That was quite a while ago.
Well, it's interesting. I would say back then, she was, I think, a movie star first. Then she became a recording artist, right?
Selena, I guess.
Yeah,
was the first.
Selena. And actually, my casting director on second act discovered her for Selena, Roger Musenden.
Holy
So
cow.
that was a nice little circle there. But in the past 10 years or so, she's become bigger than ever. She's become this brand. So this was kind of a fun opportunity to, go ta-da once again on the big screen, because she hasn't done, this kind of movie, which is really her sweet spot, a romantic comedy, in a few years. And so that was fun. And it was my first opportunity working with her. And I have to say, she is one of the best actors I've ever worked with.
Wow.
She's that good.
Wow.
And I've worked with a lot of,
Yes, you have.
big and important actors. She is that good and very underrated. I can't say enough about her. So subtle, so intuitive, funny, but can bring it.
I would say her work in the Soderbergh film Out of Sight is an acting
Fantastic.
clinic that everyone should take a look at.
Maybe, one of her finest, but and that's great because you see, the dramatic thriller side and sexy side. But she has this ability, and there are not a lot of people that do, the glossy, comedy that can ground it, and she is so aware of who she is and her age, and this story kind of played into that, and that it was sort of a second act in her career, and that her character is going through a second act in this story. So it was a very organic.
I want to apologize to anyone listening who was wondering why I didn't veer off and spend at least 37 minutes talking just about Tommy Boy. It just dawned on me that I didn't allow for any reminiscing. And but I do want to talk about, having mentioned the $1 Billion Club, just a sense of, first of all, how difficult it is to succeed at any level as a filmmaker, let alone at this historic level, but also to have been involved with and ultimately steered the ship correctly on what becomes a seminal film in comedy for generations. So that when people want to spend 37 minutes talking just about Tommy Boy, is it a good feeling? Or is it
To talk about that?
This again.
Well, it's interesting. I once heard Mike Nichols say, when someone said, "Oh my God, The Graduate is one of my favorite movies," he said, "I've made a few others."
Yeah.
But at the same
That's
time,
why I asked.
But at the same time, it's like I feel blessed.
Sure. That's good.
I had literally a message came through to my agent yesterday that the city of Sandusky, Ohio, wants me to come and be like an honorary guest. I think it's next year or the year after, when it's the 25th anniversary. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. How can I, I'm not going to, scoff at that or go, come on. So, there are times, when young people now, I do a lot of work with USC Film School, and some people say, "Tommy Boy, what's that?" And I'm like, really? And then I go the other way. It's
That's
like,
right.
Why don't you know the movie? But so I can't have it both ways. So I'm blessed that it seems to be one of those movies that's sort of stuck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My better half, who's, as listeners know, considerably younger, her and her generation can quote the film the way they quote The Simpsons and Seinfeld, which is all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's,
Well, last week it was a fun one. Somebody, a buddy of mine, Bill Kerr, who's been my editor, who actually edited Tommy Boy, he's a Chiefs fan. He was watching the Chiefs Raiders game. And because John Gruden is from Sandusky, Ohio, the announcer said, "John Gruden from Sandusky, Ohio, home of Big Tom Callahan." I thought, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's in the vernacular.
Yeah.
For goodness sake. So let's talk about how Second Act came into your life.
Well, that is a weird one, because I was on this movie, this huge $150 million sci-fi epic that I had scouted. I had an office at Babelsberg Studio, about 100 feet from Joseph Goebbels. And we were going to shoot in Berlin, and I had tech scouted in Shanghai, and I had cast in Beijing. And we actually discovered this actress that movie shut down. and she went on to become Mulan, and they're just wrapped filming the Disney live action versions. She was Mulan.
So you chose correctly.
Well, after a year and a quarter on that movie, I said goodbye. I packed my bags, did the tearful goodbye, because I had to move away for a year. I had to shoot the movie in Berlin, and I had to, for tax credit reasons, edit the movie in London. And I'm on my way, and my agent said, hey, there's this other project that doesn't shoot for a year with Jennifer Lopez, but why not on your way through New York, stop and say hello, talk about it, and maybe you plant seeds for something when you're back from this other movie. And I said, great. So I stopped in New York, had a very nice meeting with Jennifer and her producing partner, and got back to my hotel, and I got a call from the producer in Germany. He said, there's a problem. You need to turn around and go back to LA. I said, what? I said, yeah. I said, what's the problem? I said, I can't tell you, go back to LA. I said, I am packed for a year. I did the tearful goodbye. I mean, really? He said, yeah, go back. And I knew I had an idea. It was Chinese co-financed, and I knew something happened with the money. And sure enough, that's what it was. And so I immediately called and said, if you're thinking of maybe moving that movie up, I'm suddenly quite available.
Extraordinarily.
And that literally within a couple of days, I was up in northern New York working on the script with the writer and with the writers, and it started from there.
How much time were you able to spend with the writers?
We worked tirelessly with Justin Zackham, who did Bucket List, with Rob Reiner, someone you've worked with, and
Uncle Jag.
Yeah, and Elaine Goldsmith-Thomas, who is also producer on the movie. And we worked together, tirelessly for, I'd say, 8 weeks, and really turned it around, and then flew right into prep.
I mean, you were packed for a year.
Yeah.
So the idea of being away.
It was actually, being in New York, even though I live in LA, felt like I was next door compared to all of the other countries I had scouted. I scouted Bucharest, Romania as well, Dublin. I mean, it was a huge movie, and but it's sort of the sign of the times. I have a lot of friends who are filmmakers or producers or writers, and they are on a movie for a year plus, and they get shut down. Something falls through. It's a very fickle business, and I've just learned to become resilient and say, okay, next.
What's next?
Yeah. Can't cry about
it. Is it your want and desire to work with the writers on every film that you direct?
Yeah. I do. I love having the writers on the set. Some directors don't like that. I love it. And I often, almost on every movie, I do a lot of the writing myself. I like it to go through my computer, so I kind of understand it more. I put things in, terms that are shorthand for me, both from the description and the pacing and construction of the story, things that I think are missing. And the best relationships I have are with, the writers that say, cool, great, let's make it better. And sometimes they're off on other things, and I don't have the luxury of being able to beat it up with them, so I just have to do it myself. So, but I love, whether they want to be there or not, I love to have the writer involved, with me, because it's all about it's never done. There's no such thing as a perfect script.
No. I finally dipped into the directing a couple years ago, and this first film, the first narrative, the first thing I did was a documentary. So the first narrative was a comedy that I was brought on, a gun for hire situation. And the first thing I realized was I needed to, and the script had already been rewritten within an inch of its life, but I needed to do several page one so that I could breathe a sense of honesty and take away this heightened comedy.
Yep.
And I find in your films there's a sense of that the audience will be emotionally involved, and the laughs will come from a sort of authentic moment as opposed to hijinks.
Yeah, and I literally just experienced that on this one I just finished called My Spy with Dave Bautista, Drax and Guardians of the Galaxy. And it leaned into being a kind of a cute family film, and I saw a more of an analogy to The Professional, not quite as bloody, and definitely more fun, but there was and also in Man on Fire, Dakota Fanning and Denzel Washington, the relationship they had, which only really lasted in the first act of that movie because the second act was a vigilante picture and then she came back at the very end. But I actually told this young actress who I discovered for this movie, whose name is Chloe Coleman, to watch those movies, but I was cautioning her parents. I said, these are very bloody R-rated movies, but at their core is a relationship that I want her to look at because she plays this, kind of latchkey kid whose mom is constantly working, and Dave Bautista plays this CIA operative who screws up in the beginning of the movie and then is assigned this surveillance, job and to watch this family in case some nefarious guy contacts them, and he ends up striking up this unlikely relationship with this little girl, kind of a father figure type thing. And so I gave her those movies because I said, look, this is a comedy. Don't get me wrong. And I always scare the studios when I talk about my notes on something because they're not funny. I talk about the foundation, the steel I-beams of structure. And usually, more often than not, I get from whoever I'm talking to at whatever studio it is you're making a comedy, right? I'm like, don't worry about that. It'll be funny. But if we don't have the beats that we need that ground it and make it, not, heightened, as you're saying, then it's going to hurt the jokes. The movie's going to be just cotton candy. It's going to go away quickly. And I think it hurts the comedy and it hurts the emotion, if it's just silly, you know? So I try to always, ground things. And so sometimes, like I said, you have to really steer towards a drama before you can make it fun.
Yeah. If you were to ask an audience, when you go to see a comedy film, how important is it to you to be emotionally involved? They might not even be aware of how important it is. But without it, it's a series of jokes.
Correct.
And the Marx Brothers work, there were a few people who, throughout the history of cinema, who were able to do these great films with nothing but jokes. Mm-hmm. But I'll take an Albert Brooks film where I'm emotionally involved in his character, who then becomes...
Well, those are the ones that stick.
Yeah.
And I learned, speaking of the Marx Brothers, I got my break from the Zucker Brothers, who were major fans of the Marx Brothers. And that first movie of mine, Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult, was by far the hardest movie because people don't know how hard those physical comedies are that are all about the jokes.
Yeah. A series of gags.
And it's a ballet. It's a choreography between foreground and background.
Right.
Timing. There are no visual effects that make those jokes work.
No.
I mean, sometimes there are special effects, but it is, and they were, or David was very tough on me. Mm-hmm. That was comedy boot camp. And Leslie Nielsen was very hard on me because I was 30. That was my first film.
Right.
And, I realized that the older actors don't like being told what to do by a young punk. They kind of feel like, why should I listen to you? I'm going to be humiliated. I was like, no, just trust me. Until I screw it up, at least give me the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, those are hard movies.
Yeah. And the communication with your actors in the beginning, more so than now, is an education in itself.
Oh, like I said, Leslie Nielsen was quite tough on me.
Yeah, I heard Gene Hackman said to a young director who went on to tremendous success, walked him off the set, so he wasn't saying this in front of the crew, but he said, faster, slower, louder, softer. Those are the 4 words I need you to say to me.
Yeah.
And no other.
Yeah. I remember a movie that I wanted you to do.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if you remember. We spoke on the phone about a movie a million years ago called My Fellow Americans with Jack Lemmon and Lauren Bacall and James Garner. And Jack told me that Walter Matthau told him two things. That's all I want to hear. I'm actually doing Alan Arkin. I can't do Walter. But he said 2 things, LD and MD. Less demented, more demented. And that was it. He says, that's all I want to hear.
Yeah.
And also he said, whisper the direction. Don't say it in front of other actors. That's a big one.
Yeah.
You don't ever yell it from behind the monitor.
God.
You go up and you whisper because it's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. And also, and I want your take on this as opposed to spouting my opinion as fact. It's all script and all casting. If you nail those two aspects, it just makes everything you do so much easier.
Yep.
So after you've cast perfectly and all the good fortune that came your way, I find that my favorite direction to give after the cast was in place and they were going to make me look better, the best, most enjoyable direction I would offer up after a take, I would come up to their ear, not in front of anyone, and just say, give me 11% less or 11% more,
right?
Whatever it was.
Right.
And then let them do the math as to what that means.
Yeah.
Normally when I would say it, they would laugh because that's not actually a specific note. But what I wanted was them to just keep trusting their instincts. That's why they're great, and that's why I'm lucky to have them.
100%, and I've done that myself. As a matter of fact, I got to a point working on 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore that it became hand signals. And we had the easiest relationship because I would just point up or I'd point down. And she got it. She goes, got it. I said, and I'd go, And that way I could actually, not because I'm lazy and didn't want to come over from the monitor, and I go old school. I like to be as close to the actors as possible. I sacrifice. I let the bleacher section of Video Village be 1.5 miles away, and I want to sit as close to the actors with a screen, and usually a small one. So if anyone wants to look over my shoulders, they can't see it, they get frustrated, they want to go back to the bleacher section.
Sure.
But then I just would point up, down. She got it. And like Sandler would even look at me like, what the fuck are you saying? How come, what do you mean got what? You never didn't say anything. I said, because we had a way of doing it. And she, again, a wonderful actor. She knew when I meant a little bit more or a little bit less.
Right.
Ground it more, or it's too dry, elevate it a little. If you can have a shorthand, your relationship with your actors is going to go so much smoother.
So you work with the writers, and the project was brought to you by Jennifer Lopez and her producing partner.
Yes.
She knows what she wants to accomplish from this film. Was it something that she and her producing partner had developed with the writer?
Yes. Elaine Goldsmith-Thomas had, I think, come up with the idea some years ago. And I think originally was going to have Julia Roberts in it. And then that iteration kind of fizzled. And then she started working with Jennifer, and Jennifer said, this is a cool concept. And so we started from there. And I think Jennifer was a big fan of 50 First Dates. So she said, of all the romantic comedy guys out there that I'd like to, have pitch on this, I'd like to hear what Pete has to say. So that was nice. And then it went from there.
And so when working with someone who has all those gifts, as well as depth of emotion in their eyes and in their performance, what was the shorthand with her like?
I got to tell you, it was really interesting because there were a lot of times where on a take one, I'd go, wow, that's pretty much it. But let's try another. Maybe just underline this one moment here a little bit more. And I think at first she might have thought I was full of shit because I was just complimenting her too much. And I'd been around other directors that just, Steve Carell says he calls it the sandwich. That was great. Fantastic. Okay, do this, but great job. And he said, just come with me with a note. You don't need to couch it in the one slice of bread positive and the other slice, but just tell me what the note is.
Yeah.
And yet that's what some people do. And so I'm not a good actor. And I know I've had people say to me, Burt Reynolds on The Longest Yard said, kid, you're kind of hard with the compliments. I said, really? He said, yeah. And then I learned on this last one, I have to, you have to pet, the cat, the dog, they have to know that they've done a good job. I can't just go, okay, next. Because artists. They have feelings.
Yeah,
you can't just move on.
The level of vulnerability necessary for each of them to get out of their own way is also creates the necessity for affirmation. It is part and parcel.
And I've learned that it is essential. By the way, it's essential with everything. It's essential with our kids, our spouses. You can't just assume that dinner was good. Well, it's good. No, you have to say it was good. Or you have to say the job that the kids did on the baseball field. I mean, it's a great job. It's important, and people don't realize how easy it is to give a compliment. And I will say this, that our little cell phone devices have made it easier. I try to text my actors at least a couple times a week, specifically talking about something they did that was particularly good, so that they know I'm not just full of shit.
Right.
And I think it's important because they respond and they get it. And there are times when I've heard, you don't say anything. I'm like, God dang it. That's on me. That's bad on me. I have to do better.
Right. And also when you're working with people who are just great, they're just so talented. It doesn't cross your mind every time that not only do they need any sort of assurance, but also, am I going to be a nuisance?
Yeah,
with my compliments.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I don't want to trip any bullshit meter, and because I'm not a good actor, if I don't have anything good to say, I usually don't say it. And I remember Dwayne Johnson on Get Smart said to me during the press junket, which I've got the press junket this weekend. He said, Pete, we can always tell when you're lying with your compliments to us because your voice goes up. And you say, so how did I do on that? I said, yeah, it was good. Yeah, excellent.
Busted.
And Carell was laughing, and everyone said, even Alan, it's true. It's totally true. I could tell when you're bullshitting. And I'm like, oh, God dang it. So I, damned if I do, damned if I don't. So I really try to specifically find something honestly that they did well and process it for a moment and do it in a quiet moment after hours with a text, dinner time, so that they know, oh, he thought about me. It wasn't just, because, sometimes in the moment, especially as budgets are getting smaller and you have to move faster, you're on a television show, you have to move, I don't know, how many pages a day do you do?
Well, we do take a very long time on Maisel to shoot every episode, but there are 7 and 8 page oneers happening all the time.
Yeah.
And that is a whole other reward and challenge. But the level these days on everything is faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had an opportunity to do a pilot for Fox a couple of years ago, and I worked with John Wells. And then John Wells, who's, the Spielberg of television, and John asked me, hey, do you want to do an episode of Shameless? And I was scared because, first of all, it's an hour, and I know it's listed as a comedy, but it's really a drama. But it's an R, hard R. And so 2 things. 1, the tone, and 2, the page count. It's 9-10 pages a day.
Oh boy.
And so, but I challenged myself, and I completely erased how I prepped. Because normally I storyboard everything. In the early days of my career, myself with little stick figures.
Right.
But, as I realized how much of an idiot I was, that I can delegate, and I became great friends with one of the top storyboard artists in town, Dan Sweetman, who has done everything from Braveheart to Harry Potter. And so we had a shorthand. But I don't have the money to hire Dan. I don't have the time on you get 7 days in L.A. on a Shameless and 2 days in Chicago to shoot 64 pages.
Jesus.
So that's half a movie in 9 days. So, an 18-day shoot. I mean, yes, it's done. People do it. I hadn't done it.
Right.
So I challenged myself, and, I figured out a way, to do diagrams of things. I saw an interview with Jodie Foster after she did Orange is the New Black. You don't have time. They don't have playback monitors. You have a monitor to see your shot, but you do not have time to play it back.
That's right.
Like you do on a movie set.
That's right.
So you can't sometimes that's a great thing. I don't have to tell an actor. With Eddie Murphy, I didn't have to tell him, let's look at the playback. And he'd look at it and he goes, okay, got it. I know what I did wrong. And he goes self-corrects.
Right.
And that was how we got along. It was he's so smart.
Right.
But without that, it's just hard. But you have to trust your instincts
Yeah.
on a television set. And I brought that speed and change of methodology to second act and also to My Spy, which both were, second act cost 16 million and My Spy was 19, and it should have cost 60.
Yeah, that's not an amount of money that big films are made with.
But more and more, like Once Upon a Time, Jim Carrey was the first actor to get paid 20 million.
Yeah.
Well, Once Upon a Time, not too long ago, Neighbors with Seth Rogen, Universal was tough on them, said 18, that's your number, 18. And everyone sucked it up, took a haircut, and they did it for 18, and the movie made 150 million. And I went, God damn it, now that's the standard.
Yep.
You got to make it for nothing, and it still they have the expectation that it's going to make $1 zillion.
Yeah.
That's the new world.
Yeah, so the world I'm working in as a director is the $4 to $7 million indie. And they want the same level of marketable names as the $100 million Marvel universe.
Right.
So imagine at the $18 million range, the same issue and difficulty.
It's the same thing. And also you chase rebates. So I don't know how marriages stay together.
Yeah.
I am, as I mentioned before we started this show, I'm going through reentry right now. I've been off in Toronto for 4 months. Last year I was in New York for 7 months. And it's tough. You come home and, you're not the director here, is what I get from my wife. And,
we don't need notes on dinner.
Yes. And I get this. Is that how you talk to your crew?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, what did I say? So I'm going through that sort of touch. And plus it's the holidays and, so there's a lot of, amped up emotions right now. But yeah, so it's, but that's the business, lower budgets and everything's out of town. Everything's out of town.
Yeah.
I mean, you're making LA. Someone made LA out of Dublin a few years ago, LA out of Budapest.
Yeah.
I made Toronto into Chicago for the second time, but I mean, that's what you do.
That's at least geographically similar.
The spectacular thing about second act is a bucket list thing for me is I was born and raised in New York, I shot stuff in New York, parts of anger management, parts of other things. But this was a love letter to New York, 100% of the movie in the fall as a fall movie. I didn't have to fake summer in the fall. So we shot, all the iconic locations. And I would ask my location manager, I said, so has anybody shot this location before? Knowing fully well, come on, you idiot. This is the Promenade in Central Park. This is Kramer versus Kramer and 1,000 other, Harry Met Sally and 1,000 other things. But I always said, so I want virgin iconic locations,
Good luck.
But good luck. There is no such thing in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But at least
there aren't even any more original camera angles.
No, they've all been shot.
Forget locations.
I ripped off Woody Allen. I ripped off Rob Reiner and God knows who else.
Take from the best and you'll be fine.
Yeah, well,
right?
I guess.
I'm always curious, especially in comedy, the amount of time spent with a cinematographer, because there are certain comedy filmmakers who seem to care less and less about what the film looks like. But because you're spending so much time with the emotional involvement that the audience must have with your story and characters, I can only imagine that the look of it, from production design to set deck and the cinematographer, is equally important.
I was taught by David Zucker, who basically was from the comedy school of Bright and Colorful. And I did not agree. He taught me everything I knew about timing and how to make a movie, but he respected what I brought to that final installment of Naked Gun. And he even said it was the best looking one. And some people don't care about that, but I do. And I got an opportunity later to work with the great Dean Semler, who won his Academy Award for Dances with Wolves. And the first movie we did of our 4 was Nutty Professor. And I said, Dean, I do not want this to look like a comedy. I think people can be funny in shadow. And let's make it look real. Let's make it look rich.
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah, you did.
And love that. I think The Longest Yard was a beautifully photographed movie. A lot, we relied on God because we're shooting in Santa Fe and, the clouds and, the desert, adds a lot to it. But, a cinematographer still has to know how to use that. And there were some times, in one particular shot right before Chris Rock's character got murdered, where everyone went in, and it was the night before the big game, and we lost the sun. It was down, and the lights were coming on, and we had no time to put up anything. And it was one final shot of Burt Reynolds and Adam walking back into the prison. And I said, Dean, I can't even see the hand in front of my face. Do you have enough light? He goes, just shoot. And it was my favorite shot in the entire movie. I don't know exactly how they, what aperture and what this, and put an 11 on that and open it all up and whatever that lingo is, but they did it.
How wide can you open it to get light in that situation?
And it was beautiful. And I learned on Shameless, the way Kevin McKnight, who's a brilliant DP, would light scenes with, just like a cell phone and a candle,
right.
And I'm like, wow, and we'll see this? We'll be able to, he goes, yeah, it's fine. And boy, we go fast, on those shows. And they taught me. And I just had a really cool experience with Larry Blanford on this last movie, who's done a lot of work with Tim Story, but a lot of, big, huge second unit stuff. And he's a very funny guy. And for the first time, I felt like, ooh, I have an extra comedy voice, and he would, whisper in my ear some ideas. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good. Let's do that. But also he cared about the look. And so I'm very curious as I go into post on this last one. It's really fun to have people who are really good, but also know that I don't want it to look just, flat and bright. And that's a school of thought in comedy. You can only be funny if it's bright.
Uh-huh.
I don't agree.
What was the name of this last cinematographer?
Larry Blanford.
Sam, can you make a note of that, Larry Blanford? I'm meeting with cinematographers, and that description
well, also another
made him
guy,
sound perfect.
Well, another guy that I worked with on second act, Uli Steiger, who was one of Roland Emmerich's guys and done a lot of huge things with him. But then he went off. He's Swiss, and so he did a lot of smaller films in Germany and art films. So he has both the big green screen ability and the very subtle, people in windows looking backlit, beautiful ability. And he was wonderful.
And works fast.
Yeah, he does.
More and more, that seems to be the...
Oh, well, you got to cross shoot. Big time in comedy, especially.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys on Maisel do any improv.
No.
But, if you...
We're reading from the Bible.
Yeah, true. But for improv especially...
Cross-shooting, yeah.
Cross-shooting, and a lot of DPs don't like to do it.
No, it's between the eye line. I find...
It's a little wider.
Yeah.
Because you can't see the other camera. I remember Judd on Funny People, I think it was. Funny People. Had Janusz Kaminski.
Oh, God.
And I said, so did you get Janusz to cross shoot? He goes, fuck no. He's like, I'm not cross shooting. I'm Janusz.
Yeah.
So no, he didn't. But I know, Judd thrives on improv.
Sure.
And you can't turn around on the other side and say, no, what were those 3 extra things you said? And your script supervisor's going, you can't. You either get it or you miss it.
Right. How are you with screening your films for test audiences?
It's the scariest part of the process, but the most important part of the process. And you were talking earlier, about how does it feel, you had Maisel in front of an audience and that was where you hoped the laugh would be. I go through usually the average is about like 7 weeks, maybe 8 of a cut, director's cut. And then I'm like ready to go, meaning I know it's far from done, but I'm ready to have the movie exposed to an audience because I'm kind of in a vacuum at that point.
Of course.
And I don't know what's working.
Yeah.
And I think I know what's working, but I don't. And
it's only natural to look at the same scenes a million times to lose a little perspective.
100%.
Yeah.
And I recognize that. So I'm sweating bullets going into the first test because the first test is where you really know what you have.
Yeah.
It's a boy or it's a girl or it has 10 fingers, 10 toes, or it doesn't. And
Yeah.
you need to go out and shoot another couple of fingers or toes. And so one of the things I learned from the Zucker brothers, they learned from the Marx brothers in recording. They weren't the first, but they definitely recorded the audio so that when we go back to the edit room and we
Record
argue,
the audio of the audience.
Right. Correct. So that when we go back to the edit room and we say, oh, that joke got a big laugh. It didn't get a big laugh, got a titter. Like, no, it was big. No, it's titter. Let's go to the tape. So you have the audio. Well, then on Tommy Boy, I'd just been given this night vision camera from Sony. And, to record, family stuff. And it was kind of fun to play around. Hey, you can shoot your kids in the dark.
You were the first one to shoot the audience at the test screenings?
Yes.
Wow.
So I pointed the camera back on the crowd and learned a whole new amount of information. Well, it became even bigger on anger management when I'm in the back of the theater and I see a walkout in one of the test screens. I'm like, God damn it, someone's walking out. Well, they weren't walking out. There was an arrest that was going on because in the front row, I couldn't have staged it better. There was video piracy going on. A guy was recording from his coat the screen. And my assistant editor from up in the film projection booth saw it. He had a feed. And he told the cops, because Jack was in the crowd that night. And so we had police. And the cops went down and asked him politely to stand up. They're going to escort him out. The guy stood up and the camera recorded this. Our camera recorded. He ejected the tape and handed it next to an Asian gentleman next to him who put it in his popcorn. Turned out we cracked a big Chinese pirating ring. The guy escaped from the cops out in the parking lot, ran away. They caught him again, and it made the front page of the LA Times 4 different times because he defended himself. And it was the first case that the FBI had hard physical evidence of pirating on tape.
Because you filmed the audience.
And so then it became standard now that a lot of people at like the arc lights, they go around with the night vision goggles to check and see if people are recording.
Mm-hmm.
It's the new era, pirating.
The new now.
Yeah.
And you just had the notion of another way to gauge the audience's reaction.
Just more information.
Right.
More information. And there's something you can do also if you fast forward the video. It's like watching those time-lapse photographies of like a flower growing.
Right.
And it starts moving fast and then the petals open up. If you fast scan a crowd and they're still, you've got them. When you start seeing movement, you stop the tape and say, what's this part? And we have picture-in-picture, so you see what part of the movie is playing and go, oh, they're restless. They're a little bored. They're checking their watch. They're yawning. They're whispering, where are we having dinner? We don't have them. What can we do to tighten this or fix this or whatever? And so it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember early on, in fact, my first sort of introduction to alleged real or authentic acting was a Barry Levinson film, Avalon.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew going in, it was his third Baltimore set movie after Diner and Tin Men. And he knew going into the process that the demographic was going to be kind of small. I think it's his masterpiece. It's the sweeping saga of this family immigrating to America and through the 40s, 50s, and up to modern time. But he had just come off the success of Rain Man, which I don't know if you remember the history of that movie, but there were 4 different directors. It went over 10 years. They couldn't figure out how to do it. And Barry cracked the code, and everyone loved the film.
Actually didn't know about that, and I'm fascinated to hear, but keep going.
Yeah, no, and it was a very long process, in fact, for him. So much so with studio involvement in testing, which was not something he was used to. And when he went in to meet, it was so successful that it was finally easy for him to set up Avalon, which had been difficult because you just knew going in it was going to be a small demographic, or I'll just say it, the Jews. So that even though it's an immigration story, you think it's universal because we're all from this melting pot, right? Or in this melting pot. It was so specific. So when he went in to meet with the studio, and he knew he was going in to meet with them where they were trying to convince him to
test
the testing of the film. He brought a 3x5 card from a previous test audience on Rain Man. And written on the 3x5 card by an audience member was the following. That's again after seeing the movie Rain Man. Hey, comma, why didn't the little guy just snap out of it? And he said, this is why you're not testing Avalon.
That's funny.
My favorite part is, hey, comma.
Yeah. Well, there was a director who I idolized growing up and then sort of lost his way, John Landis. But did some of the great comedies of my generation, and but I heard through the grapevine that towards the end, when we started ramping up and advancing our testing process, he said, I don't need to test. I know what's funny. That's where you're going to miss.
Yeah.
Because what I have learned is there is no such thing as omniscience when it comes to comedy. No matter how good you think you are.
It's not possible.
Everyone has to test their material.
Yeah, I mean, I started in stand-up comedy. So I've spent a lifetime of getting live, instant feedback where you live in sweat.
Yeah, but then you adjust your set.
Or glory. The audience dictates the tempo.
Right.
And the energy with which you'll use to perform. Yeah.
That's why I feel like seeing my movies in a theater, again, going back to one of the first things you said today, it is the closest I feel I am to being a performer.
Yes.
Because that's a rhythm that I created.
That's right.
On the set and in the edit room, and now I'm seeing it work.
Right.
Or not work. But again, by the time we polish it, that's what's strange about it. Then you see your movies on TV and HBO and stuff, and you don't get that visceral response. And so, when a movie does go back into a theater, Tommy Boy gets screened, they keep having, like Tarantino had it for the 20th at his New Beverly Cinema, and he had a 35 millimeter print. And I said, I don't even have a 35 millimeter print of my movie, but he did. But it gave me an opportunity to see it with an audience again. I got to go to the Hollywood Bowl recently, and Jaws was being screened, and David Newman was conducting the orchestra. Now, I hadn't seen Jaws with a theater audience since, 76, when I was a kid.
Let alone with live orchestration.
Right. And so I forgot how funny that movie is in certain areas.
Oh, God, yes.
And you forget, you go, oh my God, that got a huge laugh.
Yeah.
And but you forget because you live in a vacuum. But that theater experience is, like I said, that's like me being on stage.
Yeah, no, it is. And all the instincts you have as a performer that you spend in the editing room, the final rewrite.
Working on timing.
But creating nothing but timing.
Yeah.
I mean, tone, certainly.
Down to the frame.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that.
Oh, no.
A beat is 8 frames. It needs to be a beat longer. Or you have to open up. Yeah. The lovely thing is opening up for laugh spread. But then the Zookers taught me, then when you go for television, for your television cut, close up the laugh spread because it's weird.
Yeah.
Having this, why is there such a long pause after that joke? Because in the theater, you needed to spread it out. Otherwise, I didn't hear the next joke.
That's what my better half who was with me at the premiere of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Season 2 in New York said. I can't wait to see this again without an audience laughing over the dialogue.
Yeah. So that's a nice problem to have.
It's not bad.
Yep.
You've done extremely well so far.
I like so far. I'm feeling like, wow, how much longer?
I got to keep the temp. Let's talk a little bit about what I believe is fairly obvious from the research. How important your time studying at USC has been to you, and as a filmmaker today.
Well, I was an English and broadcast journalism double major, and I was not a film student.
Right.
I crashed Arthur Knight's class with my roommate Larry Morgan, and who was a film major, and I got to, in Cinema 466, see John Badham come and talk about movies and see other filmmakers come and talk about their movies and watch these snarky little film students, critique them. And, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
First of all, it's amazing what they did. And then I can't believe these kids, are just like, why did you do that? That doesn't make sense. And I'm like, whoa, that's tough. And I've got 2 children right now who are musicians. And, one performed at Coachella, did pretty well. And the other's studying at University of Michigan, wants to be a composer. And I say to them...
Also, wow.
Thank you. And I say to them, though, I said, you sure you want to do this? Because at some point, you're going to be critiqued. and you're gonna be on the internet. It's not just your friends,
Right.
And it's tough. It's tough to be criticized.
Well, now, especially from the internet, everyone has an opinion, and we're forced to hear them.
Yeah, and you have to, at this stage of my career, I know that I'm not a critic's darling, so I'm used to it. I just want to make sure that I, entertain and that people show up, and that gives me juice to keep doing what I do. But I've had a very close relationship with the cinema school since I graduated. I've sort of been adopted by the cinema school, and I've taught there, and I will continue to teach there. Dean Daly is fantastic. She's like family. They started the first comedy minor. It's the first one in the world, and eventually it will become a major. But that's the first film school that offers it. They're constantly ranked number one. There's a reason for it. If you go there, the facilities are nicer than Warner Brothers.
Wow.
Nicer than Paramount. The sound stages, the mixing stages. They have, motion capture stages,
Wow.
IMAX stages where you can shoot in IMAX. I mean, it's crazy, the tools. I didn't have that when I was there. And I took some broadcasting classes. It's where I sort of learned, I think I might want to go this direction. But Channel 2, KCBS, that was really my film school where I really started using a camera and making stuff.
Right. We've reached the point in the conversation where I'm very curious always. The whole reason for doing this was my fascination with people's journeys. How the hell did you get from there to here? And at some point, there's either one or more mentors who, it could be a piece of advice or someone that you bring into an early cut of a film who is a current, may not think of them as a mentor, but certainly their input and advice mean as much.
Wow. Well, again, I learned what I did a lot from David Zucker. He gave me the necessary tools. I actually, I was never the cool kid who was invited to the Spielberg set, after Boys in the Hood, and sit on the set of Hook and get to watch. I didn't know what I was doing. One day I had a lunch, someone arranged a lunch with Tom Shadyac, and we both said the same thing. Do you ever feel like you're living a lie and no one knows that you have no idea what you're doing, but you just keep faking it? Yeah, I do know that feeling, because me too.
Wow.
So, and then you do it enough and you start to learn. But I grew up with Judd Apatow, and he taught me about what is real and what is grounded. And one of my best friends, Bill Kerr, edited 4 of my movies, including Tommy Boy, and then he became Judd's editor, and and edited Bridesmaids. And he's also about what is grounded, what is real. Don't go too heightened. So I literally learned from the people who did heightened, and I had to learn how then to come off that little plateau and really look at what's underneath. And then there's some times where I realize I dig too far that direction, and I get a little bit stuck trying to be a little too important, and too meaningful. And then it becomes, you have to learn then what's saccharine and what's going too far. And so it's all about finding the right balance. And so I think I've learned from many people, and I'm thankful to all those people, because the journey is long and I constantly am learning. So, and there are going to be more people who are going to be teaching me.
Right. Well, the whole damn thing should be an education from beginning to end, right?
Yeah.
And by damn thing, I mean life. It's now a segment of the show called Ask Kevin. You're allowed to ask me any question. It could be sincere or silly or neither, but I'm going to need a question.
What was it like working with Tom Cruise?
Easily the most inspiring, professional, and generous giant movie stars I will ever work with. Yeah, I mean, I stepped into that world as sort of the, everyone's famous in the movie, but me in 1991, 92 when we were shooting. And
Great movie.
It's
Great
a Rob
movie.
Reiner masterpiece. He gets all the credit. But he really did figure out his first 7 films, A Few Good Men being one of them. If you look at them, each one completely different than the other, from Harry Met Sally and Spinal
Stand
Tap,
by Me.
Stand by Me, and Misery, and
Yeah.
it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I all those things leading into this moment. And then I get to rehearsal, and there's this giant movie star, Tom Cruise, and from the second one, treated me like an equal.
Wow.
Which was just being a professional. But to me, it wasn't even necessary. And it was all the way through. And just a general sense of a generosity of spirit. And, I would kid him about being excited and happy about everything and nothing. But the discovery was it's all authentic. Mm-hmm. None of it, as someone who had to pretend a great many times as to projecting a level of professionalism or personality or humor that I wanted people to accept from me. Mm-hmm. I had lived that lie so many times myself that I knew, had a pretty good bullshit meter when I was reading it from someone else. Mm-hmm. And so it was very easy and very quickly that I realized he is also the most dialed in, authentic person in terms of who he is and what he does and how he conducts himself.
Yeah.
And so that was the big part of the inspiration.
I can't remember. Were you in the courtroom scene with "You Can't Handle the Truth"?
Oh, not only was I in the courtroom scene.
You were.
It's easy not to remember because I don't say a word until we sort of break and I have the conversation with Demi about why do you like these guys, and also giving her a little gears about I object. Or you strenuously object? Oh, well, if you strenuously object, then we should go back and object. But in terms of the proceedings, I am a witness. But Nicholson worked 5 days doing that soliloquy. And you've worked with Jack. A few times, what he is and what a truly one-of-a-kind. Mm-hmm. So when he's giving this speech, soliloquy, this whole thing, I'd already been impersonating Jack in my stand-up act for a very long time. And so every night driving home, I would be reciting the soliloquy in the rearview mirror. And so when there was time to wrap Jack, who was making $500,000 a day, and I asked him, do you hit the snooze alarm when you make $500,000 a day, or do you can't wait to get to work? But they had Rob Reiner, the director, didn't quite finish a couple of bits of coverage, and I had to go to Jack and say, Jack, I need you to come back tomorrow. I'll finish with you at noon. We cannot afford to pay your rate. Is there any way I could? And you got me, Robbie. Whatever you need.
Wow.
So Jack Jack came back, and exactly noon, no matter where we were, Rob stood up and said, that's a wrap on Jack, and a big celebration. And then I went over to Rob and I said, look, at that point we were shooting the coverage over Jack onto the actor AJ who played the judge.
Right.
And I said, if it would help AJ for me to sit on the stand and do Jack's part, I've got it memorized.
Oh, wow.
I'll have the sides in my hands in case we don't need to count them. But I don't want to throw him because I'm going to be doing Jack. So that's either going to help him or it isn't.
Yeah.
So he said, well, let me ask AJ. And AJ said, I would love that. That would be amazing.
Whoa.
And in fact, after the first take through, the crew broke out applause. And I said, yeah, that's the opposite of why I wanted to do this. This is all about
I would have think
AJ's
that would be
coverage.
So weird having you do him.
Well, so it was helpful to AJ. And back then in 1992, you counted on dailies. So it took 2 days to see dailies, of course. And I remember Rob saying to me after the 2 days had gone by and I'd almost forgotten. I was watching dailies at lunch, the last hours of Jack's work. And it was 4 takes into you doing Jack that I finally realized.
It was you?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
By the way, your Alan Arkin is so close. Can I just tell you something?
You can tell me something.
Crazy.
You can do that, but it's just moronic.
Yeah. He said, have you noticed since you started doing me, I don't stammer as much? I didn't like hearing it when you did the impression.
When he told me, I said, what do you think of the script?
I'll do me. What did you think of the script for Get Smart?
It's flaccid, completely flaccid. There's not a joke. There's not a joke in it. There's nothing for me. Nothing.
He ended up doing it.
Of course.
Yeah, but yeah. He's like he literally reminds me of my father.
Oh.
So I talk back to him like I would to my father.
Wow.
And I think that's why we get along so well. I adore him. But I remember this one time, just one Alan Arkin story.
Please.
So on Get Smart, he comes to the table read, and he would laugh even if I told this story. He had a take on this character that he said was weird. It was very doing a deep voice and everything. I thought, oh, he's got a take. Oh, interesting. So went to the fitting, and I like to hang out, because you have to try on 1,000 things. It's hours, so I like to go and bond. And so he said,
So what did you think of the take I had? It was kind of a Rumsfeldian kind of thing.
And it just popped out of my mouth real fast. I don't think, there's my high voice going, I don't think we need it. I think just do you. Just you, I think that's it. Just ground it, you. That's it. Pause. Then we moved on, and he started trying on other outfits. I thought, oh, I think I got through that.
That was easy.
Cut to that night. I was at dinner with a couple buddies, had a couple glasses of wine. I get my cell phone ringing. It's Alan Arkin.
Pete, I'm leaving the picture. I'm leaving. You completely derailed me. I have no handle on the character anymore. And because he so reminded me of my dad, and I had some wine, I just said, oh, cut it out. Really? I gave you one note just to be more like you, and now you're derailed? Come on. I never talk that way to an actor, but he just so reminded me of my dad.
Yeah.
And after the conversation, I was like,
all right, fine, okay.
and then we did another movie after that.
Yeah.
And I remember on the other movie, he even said in the middle, you just have to be prepared. This is Alan Arkin.
This is the most boring master shot I've ever been in my entire career.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, thanks, Alan. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
So, but God bless him. I adore him.
Yeah. No, he's one of a kind.
Yep.
And a great guest on this show if you want to go back through the archives and watch that. Now it's time for Kevin's pop quiz. Between 5 and 15 points possible for each of the 3 questions. Once the final score is tabulated, it'll be posted on our website along with the current standing among the top 100. Are you ready?
Yes.
Question number 1. Keith David or David Keith?
Oh, Keith David.
That's correct. Question number 2. Carl Weathers or the weather in Carlsbad?
Carl Weathers.
Also correct. Final question, Steve?
Carell?
We've got 3 out of 3, a perfect score. Oh, my. That goes right to the top of the leaderboard. Congratulations, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
For your time. Let's encourage people. The drop date is December 21st?
December 21st.
Okay. And they'll see a gigantic release and a ridiculous amount of promotion, I would think, for second act.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's starting now, and if you haven't seen it, I'm in trouble. So
okay,
it's bus stops and commercials ramping up.
Right.
It's a fun movie, and it's very funny and heartwarming.
And that's all we need to know from a master filmmaker who's a member of the $1 Billion Club.
Well, thank you.
You didn't get there by being an idiot.
No, someone recently said, so you're part of the Billionaire Club. I said, no. Big difference. Big difference.
All right, please sit there uncomfortably while I wrap things up for the folks at home. Thank you all for joining us this particular episode of The Chat Show. Pete Segal, one of the great comedy filmmakers who always brings heart and emotional connection to his pictures and stories and characters. And damn it, that moves him to the front of the list for me. Let's go with Sam Kiefer to block, engineer to the stars. I want to thank Hannah Crichton, our booking genius, who made today's show possible by asking me if I wanted to chat with Pete Segal, and a giant yes was my reply. Corey Levin and Post, all the fine folks here at Earwolf Studios. Remember, Hollywood is where Earwolf is. Stop by any time up on the second floor. Just come on in and share your views. Let them know how you feel. Tell them I sent you if necessary. KPCSfanmail@gmail.com. That is the email. Write to us. Let us know what you think. I'd love to hear from you, and occasionally I will, in fact, read your email, but not often. Let's remove you and your narcissism out of the math. I just love hearing from you, and it means the world to me when you write to us. Until next time, and as always, get out of my face.